Yes, yes, Political Soulful. We are here on Wednesday night, the 20th of 2019. We're in the 21st century. We're going to talk about racism in American schools and American public schools. The topic of this is the new racism plaguing American schools. This is part two of the discussion on systemic racism in American schools, right? And so I said, since we ran out of time, that we'd do a part two. This is our part two. I want to talk about an article that I read today, actually, and it's quite informative. Some of the stuff you may know, some you might not know, but it is putting the spotlight on something that all of us should know, especially those who are concerned. And I'll put this link up here on Facebook, YouTube, and IG. I try to get that over to y'all. So we'll be right back after this intro break. We're going to get started tonight on the new racism plaguing American schools and our society. Thanks for tuning in. Sit tight. We're about to get down. Alright, welcome back to Political Soulful. Tonight, want to holler at my homeboy, soul brother, Jerome, on IG. It's good to see you all. Thanks for tuning back in. So tonight's topic is the new racism plaguing American schools. This is actually a spinoff. The title is actually a spinoff of an article, of an academic research peer-reviewed article called The New Racism of Kindergarten to 12th Grade Schools, centering critical research on racism. The authors, there are three, are Rita Coley from the University of California, Riverside, Marcos Pizarro from San Jose State University, and Arturo Nevarez from the University of California, Riverside. All right, so check out this article and see what you think. All right, it's really cool. It's in the Journal of Review of Research and Education, and it was published in March 2017, so not too long ago. And so let me just dig in. I think that there's some cool points in this for us, and this will help, I think, give us a fuller picture of what is meant by white supremacy in our day and age. And the authors start off by noting that there have been many challenges to the status quo, to racism, to white supremacy, in many different sectors. And many people are very clear about, the racism and white supremacy in other domains of our lives and in our society, particularly in the criminal justice system. I mean, we're all hip to that. We are all hip to everything that Black Lives Matter is trying to resolve. Okay? We're hip to the issues and voter suppression, right? Many of us are aware of gerrymandering as well, and why white folk don't want people of color voting. What these authors wanted to do is draw attention to white supremacy, to racism in our educational system, which is severely infected, being severely infested. Yeah. So this is what this article is all about. I think these authors are onto something. Now they're not trying to say they have the best way to deal with everything. They're not saying they have the ultimate solution. But they are saying, they do have the audacity to say, via their research, they are very clear that racism is buried very deeply in the American education system. So they're very frank about that. So much so that part of the purpose of this article is to put on notice everybody who is deflecting from the issue of racism in schools, particularly policymakers, administrators, and even teachers and taxpayers. Many people like to identify every problem that should be addressed, but racism. So that's one of the things that they do here. And they're going beyond just the blatant racism that we may see. The racism where you see school officers misusing their power, abusing their power, particularly when it comes to people of color. Slamming kids on the desk in a situation where either calling for help or trying to tone down the tension, start a conversation, trying any and everything other than something that is at the height of violence, right? So we see clearly the choices that are made by people of power or in authority across the board when it comes to black kids, black girls, and black boys. So they're saying, yes, that's true, but we got to go deeper. There's more. That's just the tip of the iceberg. In fact, whatever you think that it is cool and kosher is actually not. And so I want to jump in. So what they do is, it's going to get a little academic today in a sense, if you don't mind, please, because we definitely want to stay up on those who are doing a lot of groundwork for us, that are giving us the ability to really see past or beyond what's immediately in front of us or what we hear on everyday news. While I like to talk about what's on the news, there are deeper trends, systemic trends that we got to be aware of. All right, and so that's what I want to call attention to, and it's important for us to start reading like peer-reviewed research. It's really cool, and the rigor invested and expended is worth our attention. So basically, what they did was they got about 4,000 education articles or studies over the last 10 years, and they reviewed them and analyzed them, and they ended up with 186 articles that basically address racism, that confronted racism, that identified it as the problem, not as something cursory or on the periphery, that racism is the problem. And then they analyzed these, they reviewed these papers and all this research and data and came up with some conclusions about the matter. And I want to talk about the conclusions here. All right. The main conclusion is that they identify something regarded as the new racism. And let me just quote them here. As we categorize the literature, we built on a theory of the new racism, a more covert and hidden racism than that of the past. So basically, what they notice is that all the articles that put the spotlight on racism in the American school system and framed it as the problem and framed it as the culprit of inequality across the board and testing, inequality in treatment, inequality in the distribution of resources, inequality and the results, inequality in students being able to get in certain schools, and the shaping of districts, inequality and these policies. They see racism as the number one hitman. Okay, and so these 186 articles were then focused on, and here are some trends that popped up, some trends that you, I think, might want to know about. Before, I don't know if you what you think about this, but they do define racism, and here's how they define it. And you can let me know what you think. Racism is the creation or maintenance of a racial hierarchy supported through institutional power. So this is how they're defining racism. Racism is the creation or maintenance of racial hierarchy supported through institutional power. So that definition is, pay attention to that definition, because a lot of people like to flip the word on to black people, say, oh, but you can be racist too. And they're not realizing the institutional power part of that, of the notion of racism. All right. So now, here's the deal. The deal is that they recognize that since Brown versus Board of Education, which is a landmark Supreme Court case dealing with racism in education in America, what they assess is that all it did was really address some of the symptoms, some issues that are rightfully issues that need to be addressed, but they haven't really, but that decision really didn't get to the disease. And what they seem to show from this point is that all of the adjustments that we see, not saying that any weren't done, in earnest, but overall, in terms of the impact, adjustments and tweaks to the system have just really been dealing with the symptoms. And worse, this idea of addressing inequalities based on race or economic class have been hijacked and used sort of as a Trojan horse for actually more racist policies. You follow me on this? So they start back in the 70s, 60s and 70s, and start examining, the effects of the Brown versus Board of Education and this 1954 case. And so, and they started looking at how politicians, how society have responded to the aftermath of this. And what they notice is that a lot of theorists and administrators have been noting that, hey, while we are trying to change policy, there are still things being persistent. The one thing that we do know that has changed, right, on the surface is blatant racist actions, blatant violence, right? That's been curbed. But this is where the new racism come up. And I'm sure a lot of African Americans know that racism has just, shifted, which is why, Michelle Alexander's book is really good, because her title, The New Jim Crow, right? And so that sort of alludes to the evolution of the same kind of oppressive agenda. So, and that happened not just in the criminal justice system, but also in the education system. And so, basically, let me just jump to the trends, because I could talk about this all day as if we were peeps. I'm just having a conversation. I found this article really interesting. So here's the deal. The deal is that we got some serious racism in schools, and here's how they are. Here's how it's manifested. So let's just go. So the first thing is that they noticed three main trends. One, they noticed that there's an evasion of racism. Instead of addressing it or talking about it directly, that people tend to speak more generally, and want to try to speak in a colorblind way, and or try to apply policies in a so-called colorblind way, but that does nothing to really deal with the causes of racism and the perpetrators of racism. And two, the second one is anti-racist racism. This was interesting. Anti-racist racism. So let me read here. Anti-racist racism, where racially inequitable policies and practice are actually masked as the solution to racism. So, like I said a little while ago, Another form of this new racism is the appearance, right, or the pledge to say we're going to challenge racism, but in actuality, the policy or the recommendations made make racism even more of a problem. So, for example, the whole idea of school choice or more competition in schools, or let's say testing, some of these things are meant to even to have a worse effect by segregating students even more. So, and the third issue was the everyday racism. And I read, everyday racism where the racism manifests on a micro or interpersonal level and thus is often unrecognized or viewed as insignificant. And believe it or not, you better believe it, actually, a lot of students go through, everybody, I mean, black people in general go through everyday racism, right? It happens outside of the classroom, right? It happens. So basically, everything that's going on in every other aspect, every other section of our society is happening in the educational system. And that's like sort of the point that I want to bring tonight. So, and I've experienced microaggressions and conversations with professors in grad school, in fact. And so, and imagine how this can play out where the power dynamic between the student and teacher is even greater. You know, I'm an adult. And so, I mean, there are many ways where if I felt the need to, I would check or try to hold somebody accountable. But if you have young kids who are now, and they're subjected to authority based on age, right, alone, and then you have the teacher-student dynamic, these everyday microaggressions can go on unnoticed throughout a child's entire primary and secondary school experience. And this is what's happening. Okay, that's what's happening. So these are the three trends. The evasion of racism, evaded racism, where equity, explicit discourse is divorced from institutional analysis or concrete discourse on race and racism. So talking about this colorblind way, it's the same thing like I call out when we talk about trying to fix American society, and where people on the further left, let's say like a Bernie or less so now, Senator Warren, I think she's really targeting racism now. But maybe Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the likes who really see the fundamental problem as like very economic, and then talk about all the injustices predominantly as a class, as an economic issue that really doesn't help deal with racism, right? And so the same thing here. So that's the evaded racism talk. And that's part of the institution. That's part of the systemic racism is happening in every sector. So you basically see it when someone proposes a policy that really does not make any mention of racism, or give somebody the benefit of the doubt. We understand that certain words, racism, probably is not going to find its way in a educational policy, right, written up. So a person might try to use colorblind language, but use that as cover to address some structural issues, right, that are basically prompting up racism. But there's not, you don't even see that at all either, right, in terms of the reorganizing of what is the most effective curriculum for all American students, and particularly minority students, Latino students, and Native American students, and black students. So this is an issue, right? So these three: evaded racism, anti-racist racism, and everyday racism. These are the three main themes here. So let me just like talk through some of this article here. So for those of you who just stepped in, I see y'all chilling up in here. I'm talking about the new racism, quotes a term that I got from an academic article. And so we're talking about how some scholars have identified and framed new racism in our school systems presently. And the name of this article is called "The New Racism of K-12 Schools, Centering Critical Research on Racism." And so I just mentioned the three trends, right? So let's dig in. Let me just dig in quickly. If I want to talk about it. Oh, so we got a comment here. Teachers giving low grades to black people in class who are working harder. Absolutely. Soul brother, you got it. See, Soul Brother Jerome gets straight to it, right? He gets straight to the issue, and that one of that's an example of the issues. One of the issues that is brought up in this article, and so the first one, evaded racism. Let me just read what they have here, and then so you can see where they're coming from as I sort of comment. Um, so let's start. Let me see where we'll start. These sentences are very long, so I'm trying to find a good place to start. So this sentence is literally like 5 lines long. So let's read this. So K.D. Brown and Brown contend that dominant rhetoric blames students of color and their families for a lack of academic success, promoting a shift in their behavior as the solution, rather than suggesting shifts to structures or policies that systemically fail students of color. Blaming communities of color for educational inequality at the individual level invisibilizes institutional responsibility, thus providing a rationale to study race yet evade concrete analysis of racism. So basically, this happens. This is the typical conservative response to all issues in society with respect to people of color or minorities. It's you got to work hard, pull yourself up with your bootstraps. You got to study. You can do better. In fact, something that's going around, a trend that's going around, which in a perfect world makes sense and will help people who are not in the same kind of obstacle course that black people have to go through, and that is this notion of grit. And it's a great concept, but every black person knows grit. I mean, Americans know what it means. We gotta work hard. That's the American dream. You're born into this notion of working hard, and that is the leading sort of inspirational philosophy for education. Grinding. And what that does is pull a lot of resources, pull a lot of attention away from the issues that are really sabotaging, one, students of color, and two, decimating the garden of creativity in the minds of children at large. Because we're seeing education now among our peers more or less as a zero-sum battle. I win, you lose. I get into Ivy League school, then I should expect a better life than you. I made it. Gotta do you, bro, sister. That's not what it's intending to mean for some people. However, it marginalizes, it takes up all the space in the minds. It's the hit thing when we're teaching. And it's the lens we use to understand why a person, or try to conclude why certain students are not doing as well as others. So, and you may hear it in another term as the achievement gap. So the deficit thinking. Okay, as Brother Jerome already mentioned, I mean, we have brilliant students, brilliant minds that are not in a position to tap that talent, to unleash that genius. And we'll get into that we'll get into that on a whole nother episode when we talk about really the other systemic racist issues in our socioeconomic paradigm. All right, so let me just move on from that. I think y'all get that. Oh, another example they give too is the multiculturalism rhetoric, which I have to be mindful of as well. And I use it when I'm speaking more generally in the political domain, but I try to be clear about this, that we have to go beyond, because the whole idea of like the multicultural, what it does, it, as they mentioned, to use some of their words, it reifies white supremacy, because multiculturalism, especially in the way that is applied in education, which is more insidious, is that, okay, we have these other ways of living that could complement American society. We have other ways of understanding, values in life, and they are interesting, and we will pay, we give a little nod to these things. But however, this is the American way, right? And so that's kind of framed, believe it or not, in our American system. And even, they note that is very noticeable in like the ESL students learning English. And so some might say, well, this is our country, and that's the way it is. And it was so funny. I was reading one of my favorite books, which I'm going to give away. I'm going to do some kind of giveaway prize on a book called Brown is the New White, how everything in American society is centered around whiteness. So it's not so much that this is our country they're saying. They're actually reinforcing a racial hierarchy by saying the way we understand the world through our white laws is the central source of American identity, right? Where actually the principles that are written in the Declaration of Independence go beyond that, right? It goes beyond that. It goes beyond what your cultural proclivities or whatever. It goes well beyond to the character, as Martin Luther King would put it. The character, the content, not just your cultural membership. So it's a lot of things to get with that. So let me move on. So the anti-racist racism, that was pretty interesting. This is some Trojan horse stuff right here, and this one is really deep. I definitely want to come back to this. I'm going to read this again on my own. So basically, they found 3 subcategories here. They mentioned one is, I'll just read from the article, the neoliberal racism and its influence on policy. And you would see that via the charter school movement. And again, a lot of this, so let me just throw that out there. All right. Urban Prep is an amazing charter school in Chicago. 100% graduation rate. All the kids are going to college, right? And they're inspired. They are confident. They love themselves. I mean, great education. So a charter school in and of itself. However, again, this is the anti-racism agenda, which basically shows us how certain agendas or initiatives that are supposed to do good, or at least stated to do good, or even meant to do good, could be redirected to actually transport more white supremacy. And so, 2, hope you're keeping track here, the hostile school racial climate, right? And so what happens there is when you take on a colorblind policy, then when racist issues pop up, one cannot express the racist issue because it's too polarizing. It's like, oh no, we don't use that word here, or we're not going to address the situation. So you have to find some about way to articulate the problem without just saying, hey, somebody is mistreating another person or penalizing a group of students, not because they are doing anything intrinsically bad that is like worse than anybody else would do, but they're penalizing them because they are black or they're Latino, and they are committing the same kind of act any child would. But unfortunately, because the extra factor, which is race, people get penalized even worse. So that's kind of overlooked in schools, to the point that when new teachers come in, they don't even recognize it themselves. And 3, racist processes of designation that serve to further marginalize working class students of color. And so when we get these certain categories and what happens, we say, listen, we're not looking at whether or not somebody is black or white. We're just looking at what their work is concluding, how we conclude about their abilities, and then we respond by creating certain needs, and we recognize certain needs, and we recognize certain spaces that we have to move students to, all kinds of stuff like that. And that aids and abets racism because, again, it doesn't address the real problem. So let me just move on and skip this. So, I mean, they do talk about how there was a lot of research that showed how standardized testing policies, I'm quoting, increase racism by centering individual achievement without any structural analysis. What is called a meritocracy, right? And we already know that meritocracy is this phony baloney in this country. Now, again, we have exceptions to the rules, right? So I know people could say, "Well, I worked hard and I made it." Yes, you did. Okay, we're dealing with larger numbers, and that's another thing we have to keep in mind, right? A lot of us mistake that immediate experience, which is just a really minuscule you know point of data in a larger ocean full of data, which is counter, which points to a counter argument to what we think because what we experience day by day. Alrighty. So they address neoliberalism. I wish I can get into this much more. We don't have. I don't want to keep you up too late. Well, you probably just go to sleep anyway. Who knows? Um, so let's see. Colorblind racism. I think we kind of know what that is. What they put here is really cool. I really think y'all should just take this article out. Let me read one here. One quote: "Masked as equity discourse, colorblind ideology is actually a form of racism that erases the contemporary lived and systemic oppression of communities of color." That's deep. That's deep. Again, that colorblind rhetoric is really, really dangerous. It's really dangerous. And especially, you can hear it in a very interesting way when people say, "Why we got to talk about racism or slavery? That's over with." So what they're saying is that there are no one in shackles, so there are no problems. There's no more Jim Crow, so there are no shackles. There's no problem. There's no racism. And what people fail to do, they're not failing, they're intentionally succeeding in arguing for that point. But with others who I would say are really, honestly trying to figure this out, what many who fall for that argument fail to see that we're dismissing the horrible experience that people are living through right now and understanding the roots and the causes of the experience that people are going through right now, right? And so when you constantly try to turn every problem into this abstract issue in a vacuum, detached from history, then you are aiding, abetting the status quo. Because to work through the status quo, one has to be very much aware of what the status quo is drawing on. It's drawing on certain advantages that were already put in place. All right, and that advantages could come from just the development, the development of a certain kind of let's say zeitgeist. Can I use that word? The spirit of the times. Like, it's like a certain way we think in a particular time, but that doesn't occur overnight. It occurs through people co-signing a certain way of living. You get what I'm saying? So it's okay for a lot of people to think. They don't even know that they're thinking that just because they see a black person, they tend to think they see a criminal, like in the eyes of police officers. They say, "I'm not racist, it's just that, this is how I see things." Well, you were born in a society that frames every scenario in a black and white issue, literally, that black people are more violent. And we see those stats in the reports. Anyway, and the same thing happens in schools where, one black girls and black boys are viewed as adults. They're treated as if they're more vicious. They're not given the benefit of any kind of innocence, or any kind of child that is just simply misbehaving. They're treated in a way that these kids are already criminals who are scheming and devising, a way to rob a bank, to murder someone, or whatever. It's horrible, but this is kind of how it is. Let me jump ship now. I'll come back to this. Well, all right, let me read this last one. So the last one, so we just did the anti-racist. The last one is the everyday racism. I think that's obvious because I want to make some points here. So the everyday racism, this is something that we have to be mindful about, especially if you're a parent. This is really a very important one. And if you're a teacher, administrator, anybody who knows kids or work with kids, our kids, including yourselves, this, are experiencing racism every day on TV, from their teachers, from friends or people in the store, I've seen, you know, people who work in bodegas in my community talk derogatively to the young kids, and the young kids don't even know it, and they're just accepting this abuse, this linguistic abuse. They don't even notice it, and they're internalizing the the aim, right, of the words, which are sort of coked in a joke as a joke. And then our kids take on internalized racism. They take on certain inferiority complex, or they take on certain stereotypes, not because they believe in that, but because this is how they've been speaking to, and none of us addressed it. And so everyday racism is really, really tricky, because a lot of us can go through it and not know that we are being impacted by it. And there's a lot to say on that, and I'm sure many of you are aware of that. So the point is, if you are with kids, you have to talk to them and remind them of their self-worth. You have to cultivate their confidence, cultivate their creativity, and guard their inspirations in life. Don't let that die out, or don't let anyone assassinate that. So, here's how they put it, which is really cool. So even there's so much. So I'm going to conclude here. And I just want to make a couple of points here. Here are some points that they make that I think is really important. And this is for people who are parents, or just somebody who's concerned about racism, and people who are administrators and teachers. So analysis and future direction. So they're not trying to give like the solution, but they are saying that there's some ideas that we should think about, and maybe we can employ them. And one is, for administrators, and it's important to expose racism in the system. And so one of the things that it seems like they're recommending is racial literacy, having the language to talk about racism, having the language to talk about the microaggressions, like the word microaggression. Right? It was always hard before the word microaggression. I never knew how to really pinpoint how someone was like being racist to me in a private scenario, like maybe an exchange at a store, or maybe a dean or a professor or a police officer, and like it was kind of racist, but like we're having a civil conversation, it seems. But I just feel like you just called me the N-word in just the most politest way ever. And so that word is important. It helps us to pinpoint the nature of racism and how it's manifested in different ways. And so that's what we need in our schools. Instead of colorblind language, we need literacy, racial literacy. And here's another thing. Here's another issue too that's really important to mention out. There are a lot of people in places of power that can be in these places of power without honestly recognizing what is racist or not. So that's another thing. So the criteria of authority or power, or being in a certain position, does not consider one's knowledge or recognition of racism as a problem. As long as you know certain data, certain details, certain theories, you're good for this position, even though the problem that the students that you're supposed to be leading and help guide, or the problem that they're facing, you don't have to know anything about it. You don't even have to know if you are even perpetuating racism. So that's how deep structural racism, systemic racism is. So people who actually mean well can be very illiterate and racist themselves, or just ignorant of racism, if I want to put it politely. So that's something to think about. So we have to expose it, and it's hard to expose it because we have this sort of colorblind policy now, trying to move past racism. That's what colorblind. We're going to do things that's going to help everybody, and so we don't want to say anything that's too controversial because like what this reminds me of? Do you remember the kid who had dreads. He was wrestling. He was in the wrestling team, and the referee made the kid cut his dreads. You remember that? And apparently, this kid, is at a predominantly white school. And there's two layers to this. That's crazy. One, the referee tells this kid, if you want to continue, he has to cut off his dreads. His locks. I mean, that's the proper word. Locks. To cut off his locks. And he cuts off his locks. Especially once his peers said, we're with you. It's okay. We know this is a big sacrifice. So they're supporting him through this traumatic experience of cutting off his locks. And he cuts off his locks and ends up winning. So that's one racist scenario there, where the students, even the kid's coach, does not defend the student. And from what I'm hearing, that the referee had no real right of threatening to kick the black kid out the tournament for having locks. So that's one racist thing, where this black kid has to adapt to the white culture. But the friends they're not seen as racist. They're like, while he's cutting, it's like, don't worry about it, we got you. And I'm like, wow. The second thing is, there was a lot of backlash, and the referee wants to sue now because he wants to sue because I forgot what the word was, but he felt like he was being tormented. Right? He forces a kid, without the permission of his parents, to cut his locks in order to participate in a school activity. And he's the one that is crying. He's the one that's feeling abused. So this is another example of how systemic racism, the new racism, is working. No one is talking about what this kid had to go through. That referee probably should be locked up or penalized. His friends saw nothing wrong with him cutting off his locks. It's just your hair. All right. So that's that. We got to put racism on blast. And that comes through voting. That comes through stepping up and, being active in, your child's education. And it's tough because obviously, you as an individual, you're not going to be able to change everything. But at least for your child, being aware and talking to your child, which another issue that they bring up, or actually not an issue, but a suggestion is here to prepare our kids for this insidious form of racism. That's the least we can do. I know a lot of us don't want to talk about it. Even though you don't want to talk about it, guess what? It's happening to our kids. Racism is hunting them down. It's plaguing them. So you're just not helping them. I mean, it's really, parents tend to don't they say you're going to talk about the birds and the bees? Parents actually wait for that right time to talk about the birds and the bees. Well, hey, you better talk about the gems and the crows, because it's out here. And that should be a part of children's education, particularly people of color. We're not in a post-racial society. We're not in a post-racial society. And even the institutions that we want our youth to go to, I wanted to go to, even the ones that are even more liberal than others, still have embedded racism. Reading President Obama's memoir was a good reminder, and he was half white and he still dealt with it. He recalled when his coach said something like he was trying to, the coach or the gym teacher were trying to get the kids to, I guess, be more athletic and hustle more and run, and he told them to run like a black man or something like that, and then looked at Obama or something and then he said something like Obama run or something, These are the small things, and that can easily be taken as a joke, or I'm just talking, because it can even be used as a compliment. Oh, I'm just referring to the fact that black people are athletic and they run fast. They win a lot of the these competitions, right? So it's you don't know our kids be going through this stuff here, and also our kids can internalize this and dish it out among each other. So talk to our youth, get them reading very early on. Works and books on racism. A lot of the slave narratives are good. There's a lot of novels that are great, and there's some fiction stories. But I say, listen, give them the real deal. I mean, the only thing I would add is you read some of it with them and ask questions. The Invisible Man is a great book that I think our youth should be reading. Zora Neale Hurston. They have books about it. They have these great books that theorize about it, and these articles, they're doing a great job. Listen, give our kids the real deal. We got W.B. Du Bois writing on some stuff. We got Toni Morrison writing some stuff here. Give it to them. Okay, there's literature, from the culture of Latin Americans, Native Americans, African Americans. Expose them to it. We got to do that. So I'm not trying to slip into the individualized, we have to work out, do everything, fix everything ourselves. But obviously we know that a lot of work that we have to do because the system is not going to be doing it anytime soon in certain ways. So we just want to help and create, an alternative education, if not a complementary one, for our kids. And each of us can do that by recommending a book, an author, talk about ideas and concepts. But I do recommend that we get them reading early on. And, what works you want them to, read, that's on you. But definitely get them reading to the works that call out racism, that show racism in full force. Because that's what America is all about. And I'll say this one last thing. So if someone might want to accuse this of, amplifying identity politics, well, we just remind them that identity politics was created, it was initiated in America by Americans prior to the Declaration of Independence, prior to the United States Constitution. We already started getting documents in different states saying what black people or Negroes cannot do, where they cannot go, who, let me get RG back here, where they can live or not live. All right? That's identity politics. America invented the identity politics that they're accusing others of having. They're just making that accusation for rhetorical reasons because people are responding. All right? People are responding based on their identity because they were forced to have this identity in the way that white America shaped. And we can see it everywhere. It's in the Constitution. It's in the Declaration of was less on the Declaration of Independence. That's very interesting, but we talk about that another time. But there's some stuff in there. But it's in all other major legal documents. The Declaration of Independence is not a legal document. It's more of a declaration. It's the ethos of what America is supposed to be aspiring to. But obviously, and that's our source. That's been Malcolm X, Martin Luther King's, Black Panthers' source of spotting the hypocrisy of white America, and the notion that identity politics is somewhat bad. Well, until white America get rid of identity politics, it will always exist. Okay, when you think about Plessy versus Ferguson, that is identity politics. It said separate but equal. Or the Dred Scott case in 1857, saying that black people are not citizens. That's identity politics. Or the 3/5 compromise. That's identity politics. Saying you, based on your color, based on your racial group, your ethnicity, you can or you cannot do things. But if you don't have this, if you are part of this crew, if you're and you get down with our kind of cultural flow, you're down. You get a membership card. That's identity politics. So what I'm talking about, what these authors here are saying in this article today, is not identity politics. In fact, I mean, and yes, it's identity politics, and it's identifying the politics that make decisions based on racial identities. In fact, so anyway, I think I should check it out. That's me talking. Thanks for, this is sort of my Starbucks conversation right here with all of you on Political Soul Food. If you're interested in this article or anything that was said here, let me know. Holla back. And, I'm available for a call if anybody might want to join in at 202-505-0250. So you can holla at your boy, 202-505-0250. But I think this article is really cool. If you have any questions about it, hit me up, let me know. You can call or send me a message. And I'm really big on education, and I'm big on education not just in an institutional format, but as a way of life. So it is that one, my hobby, and my career in a sense. So that's that, folks. Thanks for chiming in once again on Political Soul Food. I hope y'all tune in tomorrow for Thursday night Black Shoutouts. There's some black folk out here, people of color out here who are doing some good work, and I definitely want to shout them out. So make sure you tune in tomorrow for that. Thanks again for tuning in to Political Soul Food. Y'all all have a great night. It's late, so I want y'all to have energy to come back tomorrow. Check me out on Patreon, patreon.com/Kassan Henry. That's the way you can contribute if you like to what I'm trying to do. And like I said, the best way is to pay it forward, pay it sideways, pay it backwards. Make sure you let your light shine, because when you shine light on this society, it helps me see better. When you make this place a better place, it helps my life better. So thanks again for tuning into Political Soul Food. Thanks for doing you, being you, and all that good stuff. Y'all have a great night. Peace and love. Thanks, Jerome. Good to see you here too, bro. All right, Facebook over and out, and YouTube.